They say some places are cursed, haunted by unspeakable horrors of the past. John Lee Parker, one of the infamous Parchman Five, claims to have found such a place during his prison escape. Once he stepped into the abandoned farm where the very foundations were built upon horror and despair, life as he knew it changed forever. It was July 17th, 1970, when 5 convicts, all serving life sentences, made their daring escape from Parchman Prison, Mississippi. John Lee Parker and his 4 accomplices, Jack, Sam, George, and Lemuel, thought they'd found the perfect hideout, an old abandoned farm 3.5 miles from the prison. Little did they know that this was no ordinary farm. It was no coincidence that they'd come upon such a place, and that they were about to stumble upon a living nightmare. 2 days later, John would go on to tell authorities the grisly details of what happened at that farm. A tale of terror, where the lines between life and death blur, and it appears that evil takes on an ageless form. This is John's account of his escape from the immortal farm. His tale is sinister, guaranteed to haunt you long after the final word. I never expected to end up with a life sentence, but then the robbery I was involved with went wrong. I knew that unless I did something about it, I would rot away in prison. It wasn't like the other prisons I'd been in. It was the place of tortured souls, and no inmate that went inside ever came out the same. On my second night there, the nightmares began. Ones I hadn't had since I'd been a kid. I was inside an old building with crumbling walls covered in damp. A darkness surrounded me, and there was a pulsing. A pulsing from the walls as if it had a heartbeat. I reached out and pressed my hand to the wall, and these pores opened up and oozed out blood. Soon it was spouting out hundreds of pores, sticking to my skin, the liquid swelling around my feet. I went to scream, but the blood covered my mouth and poured down my throat, blocking my pleas for help. I awoke in a hot sweat, panic clawing at my skin. I needed to get out of there before the nightmare took my sanity. I wasn't the only one losing it. George, my cellmate, was too. He'd been in there for more years than even he could remember, and this was taking its toll on him. When I was freaking out, he didn't even notice. Instead, he was too preoccupied with mumbling to himself, lashing out at invisible enemies. I kept my nightmares to myself, but it was obvious to each of the group that poor George was one bad day away from a full-blown breakdown. The plan was simple. Wait until the dead of night when the guards were at their drowsiest, then make our move. For months, me and the boys had been checking every inch of that damn prison, looking for weaknesses, studying their shift changes, memorizing the layout until we could walk it blindfolded. Failure wasn't an option. It was either escape or rot behind bars until the Reaper came knocking. We had our roles down pat. George, despite his flaws, had a real talent for machinery and had been slowly pocketing bits and pieces, cogs from the laundry room, a spring here, a fuse there. Lemuel, he was our bruiser, a big son of a bitch, but quick, quiet on his feet too. Sam was the spider. The dude could climb anything, squeeze through the tiniest gaps. He'd been scouting our escape route for weeks, finding the perfect path over the wall. Jack, he was the wild card, unpredictable, ready to blow at any moment, but he had a silver tongue. We needed to take a punt on a guy like that, just in case crap went sideways. Me, I was the mastermind. I knew every trick, every angle. This was going to be my opus, my Mona Lisa jailbreak, and once I got out of there, I never planned on going back in. When the time came, we moved like clockwork. George jammed the locks on our cells and we slipped out like greased pigs. Lemuel, true to form, laid out the first guard quiet as a whisper. We could taste freedom, and it made us hungry, ravenous. Sam scampered up the wall like he was born to it, tossing us a rope. One by one, we hauled ourselves up and over. Jack had a close call with the spotlight, but he hugged the shadows like a pro. We hit the ground running on the other side, and we did not look back. The plan was to head north, get out of Sunflower County and hop a train, maybe stow away on a boat. Get out of this state and be ghosts, anonymous, free to start fresh where nobody knew our names or the things we'd done. But you know what they say about best laid plans? We'd been running for hours, lungs burning, blisters busting our feet. Then Sam managed to lose our rucksack of supplies, with only scraps in our pockets and little water we couldn't go on as quickly as we planned. And there was this sea of green. It never seemed to end. We passed countless missing posters, some new and some weathered with time, stuck to walls, telephone poles, and caught in bushes. I'd never seen so many before. The faces of the lost grinning at me in images from their past lives. The sun was starting to rise, and we knew we needed to hunker down somewhere before we got spotted. And that's when we saw it. Looming out of the early morning fog, an old farm, looking about 2 steps away from crumbling in on itself. I got a real bad feeling about that farm, but we were out of options and shelter. Even one probably more spiders and foundations was better than being out here, exposed. We figured it was abandoned. A safe enough port to rest up, gather our wits. We'd all stayed in worse places, but as we crept closer, that bad feeling settled in my gut. A coldness, like icy fingers dancing up my spine. Something about that place felt wrong. But we were desperate, we were exhausted, and as we approached that decrepit old farmhouse, with its sagging porch and broken windows that gaped like hollow eye sockets, little did we know our nightmare was only just beginning. The farm looked like something straight out of a horror movie. As we got closer, I could make out more details in the early morning light. The paint was peeling off the house in strips, like leprosy eating away its skin. Shingles were missing from the roof, probably rotted away years ago. But it was the windows that really got me. Most of them were broken, jagged shards of glass clinging to the frames like snarling teeth. And the way they seemed to stare at me, like hollow eye sockets in a skull. It sent a chill right through me. I'm not a superstitious man, but even I could feel the wrongness emanating from that place. It was like the farm itself was sick. It was infected with something ancient and malevolent. The others must have felt that too. I could see it in the way they hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. But we were out of options. We needed a place to lay low, catch our breath before hitting the road again. So we pressed on, picking our way through the overgrown grass and weeds that choked the yard. Caught in the vines, I spotted it. A faded baseball cap and what appeared to be the frayed remains of a friendship bracelet. I should have questioned those items being there. I should have trusted my gut and just turned around. But the fear of being caught, it took over any rational thought. Up close, the decay was even worse. The door was hanging off its hinges, the wood soft and rotten. Tattered curtains fluttered in the broken windows, like the house was sighing. And the smell. Christ, the smell. Like something had crawled up inside there and died a long time ago. We eased inside, floorboards creaking under our weight. The interior was just as bad as the outside. Moldy wallpaper peeling off in sheets. Furniture upended, broken. A thick layer of dust coated everything, puffing up in clouds with each step we took. It looked like nobody had set foot in here for decades. We looked around, all of us as quiet as mice. Even Jack, who wasn't one for agile movements, tried his best to creep across the room. We stayed there, breathing the stale, decaying air and feeling the years of dust sticking to our skin. And then I saw them. Footprints, cutting through the dust on the floor, leading deeper into the house towards the back. They looked fresh. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Someone had been here recently. But who the hell would be squatting in this decrepit old place miles from anywhere? I motioned for the others to stay quiet, and we crept forward, following these footprints. They led us through a small kitchen, cans of beans and meat sitting on the counter, half rusted through and covered in flies, and out the back door, toward the old barn that hulked in the yard. The barn was in an even worse shape than the house, but the footprints led right up to the splintered doors, disappearing inside. We all just stood there for a moment, staring at those doors and knowing that nothing good was lurking within them. Jack was the first to break the silence. I don't like this. I don't like this one bit. George started mumbling to himself, eyes shut and his fists waving about. He was in no fit state to explore the barn of doom, so I signaled for one of the others to stay with him. Then I took a deep breath. I squared my shoulders, and I reached for the doors. The hinges screamed as I pulled them open, revealing this dark, yawning maw of the barn's interior. As I stepped inside, I swear, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Goosebumps raced up my arms, the hairs on the back of my neck standing to attention. I could feel a presence there, watching me. I managed to crack out, "Hello, is someone there?" I was about to concoct this story that my friends and I had broken down close up and needed a safe place to rest tonight, but before I could begin, I heard the clattering of something, and then a flickering of the shadows, and my heart thudded in terror on seeing him, an old man, standing in the shadows in the back of the barn, just staring at me, with eyes that glinted like chips of ice in the darkness. As he stepped out in the darkness and approached me, I knew instantly that we'd made a terrible mistake coming here. That we'd stumbled into something far more horrifying than any prison could ever be. The man stopped moving and just stood there staring at me with a gaze void of soul. Some of the others joined me and we stared in disbelief at the old man. The way he stood there, so still and calm, like he had all the time in the world, like he'd been waiting for us. "Who are you? What the hell are you doing here?" Jack demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The old man didn't answer right away. He just kept staring, a slight smile playing at the corners of his thin lips. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the barn like a winter wind. "I've been here a long time. Longer than you can imagine." There was something about the way he said it, something that sent a chill down my spine, like he wasn't just talking about squatting in this old barn, like he meant something else entirely. Sam took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides, and he insisted we didn't want any trouble, but we were going to lay low here for the night. The old man's smile widened, showing teeth that were far too white and perfect for her face so weathered and ancient. "Oh, you're not going anywhere," he said softly. "Not now. Not ever." And that's when I felt it. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I swear I could taste metal on my tongue. The old man's eyes seemed to glow in the dimness, twin points of icy blue fire. "No one merely stumbles upon the immortal farm," he added, a sinister delight to his voice. Sam just looked frustrated, and I could tell he thought this old man was just crazy. I knew it went far beyond that. That creepy old man wasn't there by chance. He was waiting for us. The old man raised one gnarled hand, and I saw the flash of something in his palm. Something small and metallic, catching the scant light. "I've been waiting a long time for this," he whispered, his voice taking on a strange, resonant quality. I didn't understand what he was talking about, but I knew one thing for certain. We were in trouble. We were in deep trouble. The others must have sensed it too. George had switched from undecipherable mumblings to muttering a prayer under his breath, his eyes wide and fearful. Lemuel had gone pale. His massive hands were shaking at his sides. Even Jack looked uncertain, his cocky facade cracking under the weight of this old man's stare. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice sounding small and frightened in my own ears. The old man's smile turned predatory, his teeth gleaming like tombstones in the shadows. "Blood, pain, suffering, and you, my lucky friends, are going to give it to me." He took a step forward, his movements unnaturally fluid and graceful for someone so ancient. The metal thing in his hand caught the light again, and I realized with a sickening lurch what it was. A knife, long and wickedly sharp, the blade stained with something, dark, rust-colored, blood, old blood, flaking off the metal in brittle shards. "You see, this farmhouse needs feeding," the old man said conversationally, still moving towards us with eerie, gliding steps. He told us how he'd led a lost, unfulfilled life until he found the farmhouse and became its minder. How he sourced a new life into it, and when that grew low, he fed it himself. He was close now, close enough that I could smell him. It was rank. It was this musty odor like old bones and rotting meat. And I saw the scars across his arms, his neck, hands, grotesque clusters of spoiled, bumpy skin. I was convinced this old man had done that to himself. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there frozen like a rabbit before a wolf. But I couldn't move. None of us could. It was like the old man's gaze. It had pinned us in place, sapping the strength from our limbs. I've been here since my beginning, waiting for more sacrifices to feed my hunger. Sacrifices? The word hit me like a punch to the gut, and suddenly, horribly, I understood. The missing people posters. The unlucky souls drawn to take their last breath within these crumbling walls of this farmhouse. The old man raised the knife, with his eyes blazing with a terrible, triumphant light. "You must step into the farmhouse. All death must happen there," he hissed, his voice dripping with obscene hunger. "It's time for you to join them." The knife flashed down, aiming for my throat. I closed my eyes, waiting for the sick, cold bite of the blade, for the hot rush of blood, waiting to die in this god-forsaken place at the hands of this monster. The blade never reached me. Instead, I saw the others backing toward the farmhouse, and myself being prodded forward. I don't remember stepping back into that farmhouse, but I do remember the fear. I thought I understood the depths of human depravity, but the old man's terrible secrets began to unravel. As the farm's blood-soaked history came to light, I realized I'd been living in a dream world for my entire life. The horrors lurking in the shadows of this accursed place were beyond anything we could have ever imagined. And now, we were about to come face to face with the most terrifying truth of all. I awoke in a trance-like state within what I can only assume was once the living room of that rancid farmhouse. I saw Lemuel lunge forward, a blur of fury, and his fist connected with the old man's jaw, sending him sprawling back into the shadows. The knife clattered to the ground, skittering away into the darkness, and for a moment, we stood there, chest heaving, adrenaline surging through our veins. First, we thought the old man was injured beyond return. But then we heard it. A screeching laugh. This horrible sound like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the death rattle of a dying animal. The old man stood up slowly, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. When he looked at us, his eyes were blazing with an unsourced light. "You can't kill me that easily. I serve only the master of this house," he hissed, splitting out a gob of blood. He took a step forward, and we all stumbled back, aware of just how crazy this man was. He truly believed he was somehow tied to some ancient force. Something that was lurking in the shadows of this farm for longer than any of us could ever imagine. His voice took on a strange sing-song quality as he said, "I watched them come and never go. They were drawn to this place just as you are. Now it's your turn." He raised his hand, and at first, nothing happened. Sam and Jack rounded us toward the door. As for me and George, we were frozen with fear, and then I saw it. The walls, they were pulsing. I heard this trickling sound inside my head and gripped my hands over my ears. I saw George doing the same. It was just like my dream, my nightmare. I saw the walls pulse, and then the pores opened. I braced myself for the blood, only it didn't come. The swarm of flies did. They buzzed around us like a cloud of death, stopping Sam and Jack in their tracks and crawling into our mouths and my nose and my eyes, and we swatted at them, gagging and choking, but it was no use. They kept coming, relentless tide of filth and decay. Through this swarm, I could see the old man advancing on us, his eyes glowing like coals in the darkness. He was chanting something under his breath, words in a language I could not recognize, guttural, harsh. The flies began to swirl around him, forming a writhing, seething mass that pulsed with this unholy energy. As the swarm descended on us, as the old man's laughter echoed in my ears, I felt a terror unlike anything I had ever known. I lashed out blindly in the darkness, and from the flinched sounds and the muffled screams, I presumed the others were doing the same. But it was no use. We were being overwhelmed, dragged down into a maelstrom of buzzing wings and gnashing teeth. And then, just as I felt my strength giving out, just as I was ready to surrender to the darkness, I heard a sound that cut through the chaos like a knife, a shrill scream, unhuman and echoing. The flies began to disperse, the swarm thinning out as my footsteps grew louder. The old man staggered back and then stared at a section of the moldy wall, the pores still there, pulsing. And the old man just laughed, a demented laugh full of frustration. He muttered something about the unwanted one, and then he was gone, melting back into the shadows like a ghost. We just stood there, battered and bleeding, hardly daring to believe we were still alive. Only not all of us were. There, on the floor, his face distorted in fear and his limbs rigid, was poor George. As for Lemuel, we couldn't find him. He'd gone. We all felt it. The farm and sucked the life from him in all forms. And that's when Jack started muttering things, insistent there had to be another way out. He didn't listen to my pleas to stop. Instead, he charged off into the inner workings of the farmhouse. I listened until his creaky footsteps trickled out into silence. No screams. No nothing. Just like that, he was gone. There was no point in me leaving now. No one would believe us. Instead, they'd lock us away for eternity, trapped with our demons. As I watched the pulsing walls and felt my pounding heart, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. The full light of day arrived without warning, and without sharing words with Sam, we shuffled outside. The place looked different in broad daylight, less menacing somehow, but I could still feel it. That same sense of wrongness, of evil lurking just beneath the surface. In the cold light of day, gee, we were a mess. We both had gaping wounds and sores across our bodies, and this coldness now to our eyes. I tried calling for Jack, even though I knew he'd long gone. I could feel in my heart only Sam and I were left now. We made our way to the barn, hearts pounding in our chests. I half expected the old man to be waiting for us, that terrible grin splitting his face. But there was no sign of him or his grin. What we found instead was worse. So much worse. The bones were everywhere, scattered across the floor like a macabre carpet. Some of them were old, crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. Others were fresh, still slick with blood and gristle. And at the center of it, this makeshift altar, stained black with blood of countless victims. The flies were there too, buzzing and swirling in a grotesque halo around this grisly monument. I felt my gorge rising, bile burning the back of my throat. But I swallowed it down, and I forced myself to keep looking, because there, nestled among the bones and the gore, was a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle with age, the ink faded and spidery. It was mostly written in a language I didn't understand, but I understood one sentence. The first blood comes with the last. And alongside the text, diagrams and illustrations depicting acts of such depravity, such horror, that I felt my sanity begin to fray at the edges. It was a record of the old man's crimes, stretching back centuries, a litany of torture and murder and unholy rituals, all carried out in service to some dark ancient power. And there, on the final page, The most frightening finding of all. A list of names. Our names. Written in blood. The ink still wet and glistening. There was a line through George's, Lemuel's, and Jack's. I felt a chill run down my spine. A primal terror that I'd never known before. Because I knew then that we were part of something bigger. Something older and more evil than we could ever imagine. And as I looked up from the journal, I saw him. The old man, standing in the doorway of the barn, that same deranged grin on his face. He raised his hand, and the flies began to swirl around him. Again, their buzzing rising to this deafening crescendo. And as they descended upon us, as the barn filled with the screams of the damned, I knew that our fate was sealed. We were the sacrifices. We were the final piece in the old man's twisted puzzle, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. I gripped on Sam's trembling arm for a little comfort, and as the flies bore down upon us, as the old man's laughter echoed in my ears, I knew that the true horror was only just beginning. The next thing I knew, we were surrounded by darkness and the deafening buzz of a million flies. The old man stood before us, his eyes glowing like hot coals in the shadows. He was chanting something, low and guttural, in a language that made my skin crawl. In the commotion, my grip loosened on Sam. Then when I caught sight of him again through the swarm, I saw him by the old man, caught in the swirling vortex of flies. I could see them crawling into his mouth, into his nose, his ears, and he screamed a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. And then he was gone, dragged into the seething nothingness. I don't know how I got out of there. One minute I was standing frozen, watching my friend being torn apart, and the next I was running, stumbling blindly through the dark. I could hear the old man's laughter behind me, mingled with the agonized shrieks of the others. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the cold, hard ground. I lay there for a long time, sobbing, shaking, waiting for the old man to find me, to finish what he started. But he never came. And as the sun continued to rise, casting a pale, sickly light over the farm, I finally understood why. It was the flies. They were everywhere, a thick, churning cloud that blanketed the entire area, and in the center of it all, I could see the old man, his body twisted and broken, features unrecognizable beneath the writhing mass of insects. He was dead. Whatever dark magic he'd been trying to summon, it had consumed him in the end, leaving nothing but a husk behind. And with his death, the flies had turned on the farm itself, sticking to everything in its path like some obscure blanket. The police found me later that day, wandering down a dirt road miles from the farm, babbling incoherently about an old man and his monstrous flies. They didn't believe me, of course. And no matter how hard they tried, they never found that farm. They presumed my friends had simply gotten away and left me behind due to my insanity. They never found my friends. But of course they didn't. That farmhouse owns them now. I knew the truth. I'd seen it with my own eyes. I felt it in my bones. The farm was as real as I was, and it was cursed. A center of dark energy that had been feeding off the pain and suffering of the innocent for centuries. And this old man had been its guardian, its high priest, sacrificing countless lives to keep its power alive. I tried to warn people. I tried to tell my story to anyone who would listen. I told them not to go out there. But I saw the pity in their eyes, dismissing me and my tales as the ravings of a madman. As for me, I will never be free. They locked me away with padded walls and a sense of nothingness, but still, in the depths of the night, I feel the pulsing walls and the blood seeping from its pores. Amid it all, I hear him, the old man screeching laughter. I know now that I'll never be rid of him. I'll never be free of the horrors I witnessed on that farm. They've become a part of me, a stain on my soul that no amount of time or distance can erase. I fear the old man will find a way to seep into my soul, but most of all, I fear the darkness. In it, the swarm of flies never leaves me, but buries itself deep within me. John Lee Parker never gave another statement. The mental institute he was sent to eventually closed, and after that, there's no traces of his whereabouts. So, what really happened on that godforsaken farm? The truth is, we may never know for sure. Did the immortal farm truly exist, or was it a figment of John's imagination? Those that believe John's story say the old man was a warlock, a practitioner of the dark arts who had been sacrificing innocent lives to feed his own twisted immortality. Others claim he was a demon in human form, a creature of pure evil that had been stalking the earth for centuries. But maybe the most terrifying possibility of all is that he was just a man who had stared into the abyss for so long that it stared back, twisting his soul into something monstrous and unrecognizable. In the end, I suppose it doesn't really matter. The horrors John witnessed on that farm scarred him, and although he escaped, he never was the same again. People still go missing in rural Mississippi to this day, and every so often one of them shows up with fear in their eyes. They tell of a crumbling farmhouse and the horrors that awaited them there. Some believe it is the made-up stories of the lost and the desperate, but others believe that the farm is still out there, waiting in the dark, and it's always hungry for fresh meat. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.